Hi, everyone. We're going to just wait a couple of minutes for attendees to filter in, and then we'll start the presentation. Thank you. And while we're waiting, just out of curiosity, if people want to chime in the chat and let us know, where are you from? What country are you from? Are you living? Just interesting to get a feel for everyone's nationality, tax situation, so on and so forth. So we got a lot of people. We have some India, we have Italy, Tokyo. Nice. We have a well-rounded group of people from Europe. We have Germany in here. Spain in the house. Poland, Ukraine. That's great. Victor's from Ukraine. Argentina. I love it. I used to live in Argentina. Mexico. Oh man, this is great. Philippines, South Africa, Turkey, Denmark. Awesome. All right. I think we could start. We're going to actually do just a quick poll or two as well. So the first poll that we're going to send out to everyone is just, what is your business entity? So what type of entity did you form? Or are you thinking about forming if you haven't yet? So go ahead and answer the poll, just so we sort of have a sense of, just the type of forms, et cetera, that people are going to, need to fill out, and what the obligations are, because they do vary based on the type of entity. And then we have another follow-up poll before we really get into it, which is, when did you register your business? Did you register this year in 2020? Did you register in 2019, or even 2018 and before, or you haven't formed yet? So we look, the business entity, we have mostly people that are single member LLCs. We have some multi-member LLCs, which are partnerships, some C Corps. So we have a good mix, mostly single member LLCs, which is great. So then we'll just send out the other poll right now, which, yeah, just tell us when the business was registered. Again, this just helps us sort of gauge where people are in the audience, which is interesting for us. This could help us sort of direct the presentation a bit. Okay, so most people this year, but we have some people from last year, some people that haven't formed yet that are still learning. Awesome. All right, well, I am Vincenzo Villamina. I am the founder of Online Taxman and Global Expat Advisors. I'm a US CPA. We've been in business for over 10 years, and I'm going to be giving the presentation along with my colleague Victor. I know that people have questions just as we go through everything, and just let's keep it for the end. There's actually a sort of formal Q&A box where you could put in your questions, and of course we'll try to get to them, and if not, we could reach out to us afterwards, and we're happy to answer everyone's questions. Obviously we're here to help, because this is obviously a tricky and tough process to sort of navigate, especially for somebody's foreign and doesn't know the U.S. tax system, which could be complex. So that being said, Victor, let's start going through the slides. So everyone here has formed or is going to form a business in the United States, which it's exciting. I mean, the U.S. is a great place to do business. It's also just a really easy place to open businesses. I mean, I've lived abroad in South America and other places, and I know the bureaucracy of a place, like Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, where I've personally lived, and I know other places too. So it really is easy to form business in the United States. It's easy to, be able to get payments from U.S. clients, have access to the U.S. banking system, have a dollar-based account, credit card processing, PayPal, debit cards, so on and so forth. And it really is an advantage over a lot of jurisdictions. I mean, we open jurisdictions around the world, and the U.S. really does have a lot of advantages, especially for non-residents. And the reason for non-residents is really because, as a non-American person, there you would pay little to no taxes as long as you don't have any sort of U.S. presence. As we talk about it, things like employees, offices, so on and so forth. However, you still do need to file a U.S. tax form. So that doesn't mean that you necessarily owe, but it does mean that you do have to file with the IRS. You do have to essentially, acknowledge that you're a foreigner owning a U.S. tax return, and so on and so forth. So, listen, the U.S. tax code is difficult. I mean, there's 70,000 pages. I mean, I speak fluent English, and honestly, there's words and concepts in there that I don't even understand. And I've been doing this for a while. I mean, they really, do try to, I don't know if they try to make it archaic or what, but it's complicated. And, there are costly mistakes. I mean, the IRS does impose penalties for, late filing or misfiling. And, for some of these forms that, we're going to talk about today, the penalty fees can be up to $25,000. And so it is important to just be aware of these obligations because, saying that I didn't know is just not a valid excuse. I mean, it really isn't under sort of the reasonable cause statutes. So, what we're going to do is talk about sort of, knowing which forms you must file and when, right? And the different sort of filing requirements depending on the entity type, whether it's a partnership, and a sole member LLC, a C Corp. And that's both on the federal and the state level. And then also, it's important to, really set up the right systems to support the reporting of your entity, right? So things like, bookkeeping, things like if you are selling on Amazon or any sort of e-commerce, tracking your state sales tax. And, also, again, just being aware of the deadlines throughout the year. And, not just like 24 hours before the deadline or a few days before the deadline, but really just sort of having this awareness. And like I said, setting yourself up right at the beginning, which obviously everyone's doing now, right? By being at this webinar and sort of, looking for that knowledge, et cetera. So I think it is important. A little bit about us. Like I said, we've been in business over 10 years. We filed thousands of tax forms for entrepreneurs around the world. Specifically for people like everyone on the webinar that are, essentially non-Americans doing business in the United States. And then our other focus is on U.S. expats and Americans that are living abroad that still have to file at home, et cetera. So, we, I would say, are very, very, not just knowledgeable, but, this is a very specialized knowledge that not a lot of normal U.S. accounting firms have, right? Because a lot of U.S. accounting firms really focus on, people living in the United States, et cetera. So, I'm very fortunate, as the founder, that I have a great team of both tax accountants and then also non-tax accountants just around the world, right? So, in the Americas, in Europe, in Asia, and just hailing from my diverse background of people, covering various languages, and we're here to really offer services to our clients, in a wide variety of things, right? I mean, predominantly it is tax preparation, of course, helping incorporate in the U.S. and around the world, and more importantly with the bank opening, right? Because if you don't have a bank account, if you don't have a bank account with the company, then you don't really have a lot to do. And then of course bookkeeping, financial statements, financial advisory, etc. So we offer a wide range of services for our clients. And what we're going to cover today is a variety of things. It's going to be really fun. So we got a lot of stuff for, just sort of the franchise tax filing on the state side, on the federal side, talking about sales tax as well, getting a little bit into, what is effectively connected income, meaning, what will make you taxable in the States and what you need to avoid so you're not taxable in the States. And of course, looking into bookkeeping, and then the tax preparation, and obviously the tax filing deadline. So it's going to be a lot of really good stuff. If I could say that as an accountant, I think it's interesting, but I really do think that it's going to be helpful, and we really obviously hope so. So that being said, I'm going to hand the floor over to my colleague, Victor. Victor's been working with me for a really long time. He is our specialist within the incorporation and realm of helping foreigners that are looking to open up companies and invest in the United States. And I'm just curious, a final poll before Victor jumps into it, which is, how much is everyone familiar with their tax obligations? How much reading or research are people? We just want to sort of gauge, and this is obviously all relative, but how informed everyone is. So as everyone's answering the poll, I'm gonna turn it over to Victor to do this, and as I said, we'll come back during. All right, so here we are. So literally, no one said they are very well informed, which is good. I mean, it's good to know your limitations, etc. Some people have some information on enough, but most of the people here have very little information, and that's fair, because there's not a ton of information out there specifically related to foreigners opening US LLCs, etc. Right? And what I say is, Google could be your best friend, but it could also be your worst enemy, right? I mean, you could literally just go in circles looking through Google, trying to figure stuff out, and there's conflicting information. I mean, I actually had a good friend the other day, and he's non-American, and he went to an incorporation company, and they said that he couldn't have an LLC. So there's even some of the incorporators just don't know. And so I'm glad that everyone's on the call, because we are going to give some accurate information. So with that being said, Victor, you could take it away for now.
Yep. As Vincenzo mentioned, there's a lot of business opportunities in the US, and of course, many people want to take advantage of that. And fortunately, it's generally easy to set up a business in the US, but there are certain things that you should keep in mind to make sure that you maintain your company in good standing and comply with US tax laws. One of the requirements on a state level, so generally when you incorporate a LLC or a corporation for that matter, you're going to have to play by the state's rules as well, depending on what state you incorporate in. the two most common jurisdictions that we open up LLCs or corporations in are going to be Wyoming and Delaware. They offer great corporate law, they good secrecy, and it's generally two states that are very easy to deal with in terms of opening up a business there. They don't have any income tax as well, which is generally beneficial for foreigners setting up a business in the U.S., considering that you wouldn't live in a different state in the U.S., so you can kind of choose which state works best for your business. One of the requirements in order to maintain your company in good standing is to take care of the state franchise tax filing, which is also called annual report in many states. In Wyoming, both LLCs and corporations, you're going to have to file this annual report filing by the first day of the month that you incorporated your business. So if you go ahead and set up your business in 2020, in September, let's say, your annual report filing is going to be due by September 1st, 2021. In Delaware, it's a little bit different. LLCs generally file their annual report by June 1st every year, while corporations, they file their annual report by March 1st. And in other states, they have other deadlines. So another popular option is going to be Florida, especially for the Latin American clients. Usually prefer Florida instead, which is also a very good state to incorporate your business in. And their deadline is May 1st instead. One of the other requirements on a state level is that you need to maintain a registered agent. A registered agent is a person or a company that can receive mail on behalf of your company. So in case of any mail from the Secretary of State, any lawsuit, if that would ever happen, it would be sent to this registered agent. Some might call it a legal representative, but more so than anything, it's more of a compliance service that you need to have, and you need to renew this on an annual basis in order to keep your company in good standing. It is important to both renew the registered agent service and pay the annual report fee. Otherwise, there might be some penalty fees depending on your specific state. And if you continuously don't pay these fees, it could lead to forfeiture of your company, or even the state dissolves it for you if you don't comply with this. It's very important to keep track of this and make sure that you're aware of these fees, and that you need to renew them on an annual basis. Another thing that is very common and can be a bit misleading as well is, as a foreigner, if you're working with US providers, there's certain tax certification forms that you would need to provide to this US provider, and they're a little bit different depending on the specific entity that you have. So for C corporations and partnerships, you would generally provide a Form W-9. You provide this to the provider, and in return, you will get a Form 1099 that reports the income that was paid to your company, and you would include this on your US tax return. For single member LLCs, however, it's a bit different. If your single member LLC is engaged in a US trade or business, and this is a concept that we're going to go into a bit more in detail a little bit later in this presentation, you would still provide the Form W-9. If you're engaged in a US trade or business, you would be subject to pay tax in the US, and in that case, it's the correct form to use. But if you're one of these companies that wouldn't be subject to tax in the US, you're not engaged in a US trade or business, then it's important to use Form W-8-BEN instead. And the reason for this is that if you would provide the US provider with a Form W-9, they're going to return this Form 1099 reporting the income. And this information is also furnished to the IRS. And in that case, the IRS is going to expect you to file a tax return and pay tax on this income. Form W-8-BEN instead will certify that you're a foreigner, you don't live in the United States, you're not a US citizen, and that you're not subject to pay tax on your income in the US, in which case you would not receive this Form 1099. So it's important to know whether or not your company is going to be subject to tax in the US or not. And it's important to use the correct form in this case to avoid any trouble with the IRS going forward, income tax filing time, to avoid any confusion, of course.
Just to chime in too, I mean, when we say provider, right, first off, we're talking about a client. So if you have a US client that, paid you for a big project or whatnot, they need these forms for their accounting. Now, the issue is that there is, their accountant might say, oh yeah, well, we need a W-9, right? Because that is a typical form that they would, maybe tell their client to send to their US clients. However, again, if you're not engaged in a US trade or business, technically you need to do the form WABEN. So, I mean, we've had times where we've had to push back for our clients saying, no, actually the person that's been paying you, they're misinformed, their client's misinformed, because again, their accountant's misinformed, because of the fact that the accountant's, not used to any sort of international stuff. So it is important for the people that are paying your company, your LLC in particular, that you really need to insist, oh no, it's the WABEN. I know my obligations due to this awesome webinar that we did in this great accounting firm that we worked at. But yeah, so I think that's important to sort of know for everyone. I saw there was a question that went through in the chat.
Yeah. Another thing to keep in mind, and this generally applies to e-commerce companies that sell products from within the United States. So whether you use the Amazon FBA system or whether you use a third-party fulfillment service inside of the United States, and you sell your products to your clients from within the United States, you might be subject to state sales tax. In this case, it can be a hard task, especially with Amazon FBA, I would say. It can be a hard task to track and collect and pay the state tax or state sales tax that you should, due to the fact that your products are most likely going to be spread out over different distribution centers of Amazon all over the US. And there are services to help with this. We generally recommend a service called taxjar.com, and it will help you to track your state sales tax, and of course collect it when necessary and pay when necessary. Another important requirement, and that can sometimes be overlooked, is the importance of bookkeeping. In certain cases, with certain entities, failure to maintain proper books and not being able to furnish the IRS or provide the IRS with these books upon request can lead to significant penalties, up to $25,000. But more so than doing bookkeeping as more of a compliance thing, it's also going to help you to get a better understanding of your business. How is my business doing? What is my main source of revenue? Where are the majority of my expenses going towards? And in order to get a monthly report, just to get a better understanding of how your business is doing, the health of your business, is very useful in terms of just getting a better understanding and see what you should focus on and what maybe you can cut on in terms of expenses. Contrary to many countries, we work with people all over the world, and we've seen a lot of times where people ask us whether or not they would have to provide us with all their invoices and all their receipts, as you do have to do in many other countries. In the US, it doesn't really work like that. In order for us as tax accountants to be able to prepare your tax return, we would just need your annual profit and loss statement or your annual reports in order to prepare the tax return. This doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't keep your invoices and shouldn't keep your receipts. It's always good to keep this in your own records to make sure that in the unlikely case or in the unlucky case of an audit, you have all of these invoices and receipts, and you can provide this to the IRS and make sure that that there would be no issue prove your expenses, to show your income, etc. Um, a lot of you might ask yourself, what are the advantages of having an LLC in the U.S. or another business entity for that matter, a corporation? Um, the main benefits I would say is, first off, getting access to the U.S. banking system. You can, if you work with mainly U.S. clients, or if it's more convenient for you to get paid in U.S. dollars, you have the option of having a U.S. bank account with the U.S. LLC or U.S. corporation. It also gives you access to be able to use U.S. Payment processing services such as Stripe, PayPal, for example. And it would also give you a debit card that you can use for your everyday expenses, or if you need to make any distributions from your business entity, you can go ahead and pull that out of an ATM in your wherever country you're located in. Another benefit is that, especially LLCs, this does not necessarily apply to corporations, but an LLC doesn't pay tax on a corporate level. So the business entity doesn't pay tax. However, profits and losses are passed through to the individuals that own the LLC and are taxed on an individual level. And a lot of times, due to the fact depending on how you do business, whether or not you're engaged in a U.S. trade or business, you might not be subject to taxes in the U.S. to a point where there wouldn't be anything to report on an individual level, considering that you're not a U.S. citizen and you don't live in the U.S. This is a little bit different for corporations. Corporations are separate entities, and they're going to pay taxes on their profits by themselves. So that's something to be aware of. And also keep in mind that an LLC, if you use it as a holding company, if you own investments in the U.S. or assets, you wouldn't be subject to any capital gains tax when you sell those assets. So that's also something that's very, very beneficial.
We see a lot of people that end up using the LLC to sort of, build their nest egg in the United States, meaning, you can own investments, whether it's mutual funds, index funds, stocks, bonds, et cetera. And really being a non-American and not having to pay any capital gains tax is a huge advantage. Generally speaking, there are dividend taxes, where you're subject to a withholding and interest. But if you're, purely looking long term and investing in the stock market for, 10, 20, whatever plus years, I mean, and not having to pay any capital gains is huge.
Yeah. So while you pay tax on dividends and interest on an annual basis, you could potentially sit on your investments, and once they've grown enough, you can sell them without any capital gains tax, which is a huge benefit. We're going to try to give an example. We've been talking a lot about companies paying tax or companies not paying tax, depending on how they do business in the U.S. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper in this, and hopefully be able to explain it in a way that you would understand. Even though this is very complex part of the tax code, it generally can be more simple than complex in this case. And for example, this simple example is talking about a Bulgarian software company, a company that is not run within the United States. So it's a company that offers programming and design services for U.S. clients. They want to be able to receive payments in U.S. dollars through a U.S. bank account to save on currency exchange fees, also making it easier for their clients to pay them. But considering that this company is doing they're performing all their services from Bulgaria in this case, all their employees, the whole company is being managed from Bulgaria, and they don't really have any presence in the U.S. to a point where they don't have any office locations or employees in the U.S. They would not be subject to tax in the U.S. due to the fact that their income would not be considered effectively connected with the U.S. If this was a bit different, to a point where the company would have some employees in the US, or they would have some business location in the US, this might change in that sense that the income could be considered effectively connected income, in which case they would be subject to tax in the US instead. And we're going to go into that a little bit deeper here. So basically, what is effectively connected income? Generally, a company that is doing business in the US is going to be considered engaged in a use, trade, or business if this company, again, has an office location or warehouse in the US, or if they have a dependent agent, and that dependent agent does something substantially to further your business in the US. And basically what this means is that you have an employee or a person working for your company or another company that works almost exclusively for your company in the US. And they do something substantially to further your business. So sales or marketing rather than something purely administrative. So if you have a secretary that answers the phone or answers emails in the US, that doesn't necessarily change the tax structure of your company. Another concept, and this only applies to certain countries that have a treaty with the United States. It doesn't apply to all countries that have a treaty with the United States. So it's important to study the specific treaty in your country of residence in order to understand whether or not we can claim this exemption based on a permanent establishment. And basically what this means, again, the company is performing all their services from a foreign country, not from within the United States. They don't have a permanent establishment in the United States to a point where there's no store, office location, employees, etc., to a point where you're basically saying that the whole company, even though it's incorporated in the United States, it's doing business outside of the United States and it's managed from a foreign country.
I think it's also important to just note that, again, I mean, it's, you know, you can't have any U.S. employees, and then you have this notion of dependent agents. You know, you're allowed to have contractors. But again, I mean, what is the difference between an employee and a contractor? I mean, a contractor, if they're, you know, if you're one of many clients, you know, then that's then they're a contractor, right? But if you are a, you know, but if you're the sole sort of revenue source for that person and you're telling them to do on a daily basis, you know, then that's an employee. So, you know, there's a real notion of the difference, and it really makes a difference, right? Because obviously an employee would cause you to have effectively connected income in the United States and be taxable, and a contractor wouldn't.
Yeah. And tax return preparation, and this is more on the federal side. Some companies, especially if you own real estate in the US, for example, to a point where you have a US assets that is producing money in the US, then you might be subject to a state tax filing as well. But in general, for most foreigners doing business in the US, you're going to have to worry about the federal tax filing. As we learned on the initial poll that we had in the beginning of this presentation, most of you are going to be single member LLCs. And for single member LLCs, there's really two scenarios. If you're engaged in a use, trade, or business, again, if you're subject to tax in the United States based on how you do business. So again, if you own US stock and you receive dividends or interest, you might have to pay tax on that. You would have to file a Form 1040-NR. If you own US real estate, you would also have to file a 1040-NR. Or if you how you do business, if you have US employees or you have a business location in the US, you would also have to file a Form 1040-NR, which is basically a non-resident individual tax return. And it's important to know that a single member LLC in the United States is disregarded for tax purposes. So basically the individual is going to be liable to report whatever income and expenses this LLC had. If in case you are not engaged in a US trade or business and you're not subject to tax in the United States, you would instead have to file Form 5472, which is attached to a pro forma Form 1120. And this form instead reports any transactions between, so rather than reporting any income and expenses of the company, it's going to report transactions between the LLC and its owner. So whatever money goes in or out of the LLC in relation to its owner will be reported on this form. So it's a little bit different in terms of what needs to be reported on this form. So for a single member LLC that is engaged in a US trade or business and will have to pay tax on its income in the US, again, you will have to file Form 1040-NR. In order to prepare this return, your tax accountant is going to need the articles of incorporation of your LLC and the EIN, the tax ID. We're also going to need a profit and loss statement showing the income and the expenses of the company. We're going to need some basic information about the owner of the LLC, name, address, some information about your US travel if you travel to the US, your resident status of the US, if you've been there on a visa, or if you have a current visa, then we need some information about that as well. And it's important to know that even though you might have already applied for the EIN, the tax ID on a for the business, but as a individual filing an individual tax return in the US and paying tax on an individual level, you would have to apply for an ITIN as well, which is an individual taxpayer identification number. This is applied when you file the first year tax return, and it's a one-time application. So once you have this ITIN, you will be able to reuse it going forward. And for single member LLCs that is not engaged in US trade or business, is not taxable in the United States, would instead file Form 5472. And as mentioned, same as with the other LLC, we're going to need the articles of formation, the EIN, some basic information about the LLC owner, the full name, address, country of residence, and country of citizenship. But the difference here is that we're going to have to report transactions between the LLC and its owners. And transactions in this case can be any capital contributions, so any funds that you introduce to your LLC, any distributions of profits, or if you're distributing the contributions that you made to the company, any loans to the company, or any loans from the company for that matter, any salary payments to yourself, any business expenses that you pay with personal funds, or any personal expenses that you pay with business funds, or any business revenue that you receive to personal bank accounts, for example. So this is what has to be reported on this form. And you would also have to report the value of any assets held by the LLC as of December 31st, the prior year, for the year that we're reporting. And assets in this case can be inventory for e-commerce company. It can be cash in the business bank accounts. If you hold any other assets, of course, that would be reported as well. Worth mentioning here is that one return doesn't exclude the other. So even though you would have to file 1040-NR and pay taxes on your income in the United States, you might still have to file a Form 5472 if there were any transactions between you as the owner and the LLC that would have to be reported. So just because you're filing 1040-NR doesn't mean that you're excluded from filing this 5472. So in some cases, you might have to file this form as well on top of the 1040-NR filing. Another popular business entity, as we saw in the initial poll, is the LLC partnerships, an LLC with 2 or more members. Here, it's also going to depend whether or not the company is engaged in a US trade or business, but the initial filing for the LLC is going to be the same. So an LLC partnership is not disregarded for tax purposes and will instead file its own tax return, which is filed on Form 1065. For this, the tax accountant is going to need the corporate documents, again, the articles of formation, the EIN, and an operating agreement outlining the ownership of the company. And we're going to need the financial documents, the profit and loss statements, and a balance sheet. Um, Here, the difference lays in whether or not the business is engaged in a U.S. trade or business. So if a partnership is not engaged in a U.S. trade or business, the tax filing would stop at this form 1065, the tax filing for the LLC. But if you're liable to pay tax on the profits from this LLC, each member of the LLC will also have to file their own 1040-NR individual tax returns to report their share of the income and pay tax on that in the US. Or if there were losses, they would have to report those as well in the tax return in order to be able to carry those losses over to a future year. Also worth mentioning here is that a partnership LLC with foreign members, that will sometimes you will have to withhold tax for those foreign members, especially if you own real estate, for example. There might be a requirement to withhold taxes on behalf of those foreign members. This is something that has to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. So it's really important, if you own real estate, for example, or if your company is subject to tax in the US, reach out to your tax accountant and we can help you to understand whether or not you would have to do this withholding on an LLC level. And the third entity, there was a couple of you that had set up a C corporation in the US. And in this case, you would file taxes on Form 1120. Similar to the LLC partnership or the LLC single member that pays tax in the US, we would also need the Articles of Incorporation, the EIN, and the shareholders agreement that outlines the percentage of ownership of the different shareholders, and also outlines the officers and directors of the company. And we would need the financial documents, the profit and loss statement, and the balance sheet. And again, a C corporation is going to pay, it's a separate entity that's going to pay taxes by itself. So it doesn't pass through the tax burden to the individuals that own the company necessarily. So if the C corporation is running at a profit, those profits would be subject to a 21% corporate tax. A lot of times when foreigners own US C corporations, a good way to optimize your tax situation is to, if it allows you to do so in your country of resident, of course, is to pay yourself a salary, in which case the salary is not going to be taxed in the United States. It is important, however, that it's paid as a salary. So it should be somewhat consistent. It should not be paid out in a lump sum. It should be paid throughout the year. In which case you would be able to claim this as an expense on your C corporation tax return, which would lower the net profit, in which case you would pay less tax to the United States as well. If you, however, pay yourself dividends, so you pay yourself a lump sum at the end of the year, or any other part of the year for that matter, that would be subject to tax in the US. And the tax rate is going to depend a bit whether or not your country has a tax treaty with the United States. Sometimes you can be subject to a lower rate, but generally you will be subject to some tax on those dividends.
Yeah, just as an FYI, I mean, dividends generally are withheld at 30%, but again, if you're from a tax treaty country, that withholding could go down to at least as low as 10%, generally 15%.
Yeah. Now you know a bit more about how to file your taxes, but it's also important that you file your taxes on time. So there's deadlines throughout the year in terms of when you have to submit your tax return by. If you miss these deadlines, there can be sometimes substantial penalty fees. And it is important to submit your tax return on time. For partnership LLCs, you're going to have to submit your tax return by March 15th every year. For single member LLCs and C corporations, you're going to have to submit your tax return by April 15th. If you can't file by the deadline, if you know that you're waiting for some information, or you don't have the possibility to file before the deadline, it is important to reach out to your tax accountant with enough time in order to prepare for an extension. An extension is basically a request to give you some more time before you can finalize your final tax return. In which case, the tax deadlines for both or the different type of entities would be extended by 6 months. It is important to know, though, that a extension is an extension of time, but not an extension to pay. So if your company would be subject to tax in the US, it is important to pay by the original due date, so March 15th or April 15th. Well, in this case, it's only going to apply to the April 15th deadline. So it is really important to make sure that you start early and make sure that you're aware of these deadlines. To get started early with your taxes, it's always better to have more time rather than less. Also, something to keep in mind is to think about taxes throughout the year. Not only close to the deadlines, but also think about taxes when preparing for the next year, and also look into what you need to have to do for the next year. A good way to get started is, of course, bookkeeping, not only for tax purposes, but also, as mentioned previously, to get a better understanding of your company and how it's doing, and the health of your company, and get monthly reports to understand how your company is doing and what you could do better, or what you're doing really good. And now Vincenzo is going to take over again and talk a little bit about how we at Online Taxman can help you with these different compliance requirements, the tax returns, the bookkeeping, etc. So yeah, I'll let you take over, Vincenzo.
All right. And first, I just want to gauge, I mean, how's everyone feeling? Is everyone is their head ready to explode, or is this just a lot of knowledge? Let me know in the chat how everyone's sort of taking everything in. Because I know that this is it's a lot to handle, right? I mean, taxes are complicated. You know, I think me and Victor are really interesting people, but you know, the tax stuff can be burdensome, you know. So really, well, first off, before we sort of get into this, we're just curious. We're going to send out a poll. And by the way, you know, we will get to everyone's questions. I see a lot of people asking questions in the chat. So the poll is, how are you currently doing or planning to do your bookkeeping? You know, we can't stress this enough. I mean, just because I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, I mean, Victor as well. And, you know, entrepreneurs are so focused on building the business and, you know, getting the next sale, et cetera, that they sometimes fail to sort of look, you know, into the details. And there's a saying in the United States, the devil's in the details. And it really is true. I mean, you know, being able to sort of identify, you know, where certain expenses are trending, or, you know, if you're selling, if you have e-commerce, you know, what's your cost of goods sold, what are your inventory levels, you know, looking at seasonality, you know, all this stuff really helps you analyze your business. And if you're a new entrepreneur, you know, the bookkeeping and really just in general data is super, super important to just understand the health of your business and really understand, you know, where things are going, where things are trending, so on and so forth. So, so according to the poll, you know, some people do it themselves. You know, there's some professional bookkeeper, and a lot of people, you know, still thinking about it. So listen, I mean, if, you know, I don't think bookkeeping's, you know, necessarily, you know, is not a bad thing if you do it yourself. I think it's also just like an allocation of time, right? And if you are, you know, focused on, or if you want to focus on your business, right, and you want to focus on building a team, you know, building a client list, then you spending hours and hours trying to figure out bookkeeping, you know, with QuickBooks or some of these bookkeeping softwares just really detracts you from getting that sale. And so, you know, I do encourage you to sort of look into bookkeeping and looking into, you know, just what services you could outsource, what services you could bring in-house, and so on and so forth. So let's continue on. And then, you know, like I said, at the end, we will get to everyone's questions, but it's important there's a little Q&A box, Q&A meaning question and answer. So I encourage everyone to put their question in the Q&A box, just because it's a lot easier to go through that as opposed to the chat, which we'll do at the end. So where do we come in, right? I mean, as I said, we're a full service firm. So we do help with bookkeeping, right? And we do have experience with Amazon sellers, e-commerce, doing cost of goods sold, startups all over the world that need anything from sort of basic financial statements to audited financials, so on and so forth. And, we have some starter packages available we'll sort of get into. And with this bookkeeping, as I said, it not only will help with the standard reports needed for tax filings, as Victor said, with the balance sheet and income statement, but also just, monthly reports. Someone just mentioned on the chat, if you are going to seek investments, especially U.S. investment, having a U.S. firm, and like I said, we could have certified, compiled financial statements, audited financial statements for your investors to show, hey, these people are serious. They have a serious tax and accounting firm that handles their books. You could go to the next slide. So we offer 3 packages for bookkeeping, right? We have a starter package. This is for, probably a lot of people on the call. I mean, if you have under 150 transactions a month, then you would be a starter package. And, we integrate it with different apps. We use QuickBooks, which is sort of the gold standard when it comes to bookkeeping in the US. And, again, there's monthly reports, the profit and loss statement, the balance sheet, the statement of cash flow, and again, we are sort of reconciling, bank cards and credit cards that generally flow right into the software. It's pretty neat. And these are all reviewed by a CPA. I mean, ultimately, your tax return and your books, if you do work with us, are CPA reviewed, right? CPA means Certified Public Accountant. That's sort of the standard of accounting in the United States. And so they are essentially certified by us and by either myself or one of our partners. Victor, you're going back too far ahead. I was gonna go through. But again, I mean, it is about tracking your transactions, right? So, what does that entail? First, setting up a chart of accounts, right? Where are the different types of expenses and transactions that are being tracked? Again, of course, tracking these transactions, which depending on what package, ultimately, or depending on the amount of transactions, ultimately depends on the type of package, but tracking the transactions, of course, reconciling the bank and credit card accounts, right? Making sure nothing's missed. I think a lot of times, people don't know, well, is this expense deducted? What about meals? What about entertainment? What about paying to this contractor, that contractor? So, part of our job is letting you know, hey, this is deductible, like you should do this, or this isn't deductible, right? And so, reconciling, categorizing all these expenses, et cetera. And that's really part of, the bookkeeping service that we provide. And then, like I said, I mean, having the monthly reports, so you could make financial decisions, you could apply for loans, you could, show potential investors, and, most importantly, just understand where things are going in your business. Where's the cash flow need? What's the seasonality, et cetera. And so, our reports show the profit and loss, the balance sheet, and the cash flow, which are the 3 sort of integral parts of your business to understand where things are going. And what else is included? Like I previously mentioned, everything is reviewed by a CPA, so ultimately signed off. You do have 24/7 access to the secure platform, which is QuickBooks. We use QuickBooks Online. Included in the bookkeeping side is the the fee for bookkeeping for QuickBooks, so that's already included. And then of course, any email and phone support for one of our experienced bookkeepers. So again, I mean, any questions you have, 24/7, we're here to help. As I said, if you do need more than a starter package, there is a pro package and premium package. So for people that are, that have up to 250 transaction a month, that would be a pro package. Of course, if you had 5 bank or credit card accounts, right? If you had multiple partners, multiple, managers or trusted employees, all that could flow into the bookkeeping. Of course, any sort of miscellaneous 1099 miscellaneous forms, which are forms to pay U.S. contractors, that's included. Creating a budget, helping with us doing invoicing for you, billing, etc. And premium packages is the next step. I mean, for large organizations that have up to 500 transactions a month, more bank and credit card statements, more contractors, and also want to really track their business performance indicators, right? The KPIs, key performance indicators. That's what a premium package entails. So it really is obviously dependent on the level of of the business and sort of where things are going. Now, here are the packages, right? I mean, these are monthly packages, but of course, for everyone on the call today, because everyone's listened to us at this point, we all are offering a bonus. And so the bonus right now is, again, 187, 375, or 525, and that's on a monthly basis. And if you sign up for 3 months, we'll give you 1 month free. So essentially, you're not paying any sort of setup fee, right? Which is a $150 value. We're giving you 1 month free, which essentially is a 25% discount. And as you could see, the packages are already discounted. So, here we are trying to offer people a very favorable starter rate. And you don't need an EIN to sign up. This is something that if you have a business and you're operating, obviously you should be doing bookkeeping. And, obviously we'd love to work with everyone, but we do recommend, if people are ready and are going to need this, obviously, because you're going to need to file your taxes anyway. If you do sign up before July 31st, then you'll be subject to these favorable monthly rates, as well as a 1 month free bonus. And so, obviously at the end of the call, we'll give everyone an email to sign up. But regardless of whether you have an EIN or not, I mean, again, you're able to do your bookkeeping and be eligible for the deal. Now, of course, tax preparation services are another thing that we do. And that's something that we do securely online. We have a secure file storage service, box.com. The secure payment portal, so you can pay us securely online. And everything's basically done securely and easily online, right? Because obviously we're a global firm. We have clients around the world. And that's obviously just the way that we've built it up with our development team and our technology. So, again, what's included, right? Tax preparations included, but also just full year going consultations, right? So basically, if you become a tax client and you have a question throughout the year, a life decision, an investment decision, you're bringing a new partner in, you want to sell your company, you're moving, you might hire a U.S. employee, you might fire somebody in the U.S., whatever the case is, anything related to, questions related to your tax situation, that's included. I mean, we're not here to nickel and dime people, et cetera. I mean, we already know these answers. So, all you have to do is just reach out and we'd be happy to help. And so the tax preparation services, right? And these are a one-time fee, right? This is a, end of the year, we're going to do your taxes by those dates that Victor said. And, here is the fee for everyone on the call today to sign up. And again, if you sign up before July 31st, you have a single member LLC, what's normally $549 is now $399. If it's a partnership, which requires more reporting with the income statement and balance sheet, is now $599, as is the C Corp. And so, again, these are really low prices. I mean, these really candidly are way below what we've offered before. And a lot of it has to do with obviously just doing this webinar. This is the first time for us, actually putting together a webinar for you all. And I think it's been really informative. And so as such, for being a part of this, we want to give everyone a discount. Now, of course, at the end of the call, at the end of the webinar, we'll get everyone's email. And, of course, if you do want a copy of the webinar, we're happy to share it with you upon request, et cetera. So, again, if you do want to sign up for bookkeeping, if you want to sign up for the tax preparation at this discounted rate, then, you're going to receive an email with a link to the recording and, again, the link to sign up for the service. So that being said, we're happy to open up the floor to questions. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that everyone becomes a client with us because candidly, I really like helping entrepreneurs and making people's sort of, business goals come true. So let's go to the question. So, I mean, again, the recording is going to be available after this webinar. So again, everyone's going to be able to answer that or to get that. Going through all these wonderful questions.
But what do we have the most amount of questions? Now I'm interested as well.
So I saw a lot of people, and I want to give this as a broad-based comment, because I know there was a lot of people that talked about, where's my EIN, right? And listen, I'm sure everyone's aware, we don't have to, talk about this. In fact, I'm actually glad that we didn't bring this up at all because it's too much on the news, et cetera. I mean, and it's terrible, but obviously we're in a global pandemic, right? So the IRS has been closed for months. I mean, they closed sort of, you might know more than I do, Victor. What, they closed like maybe mid to late Feb, and they've just started reopening. In fact, I think what we had heard was that the sort of the EIN services are going to be back to normal starting in August, and so I'm sure a lot of people are clearly frustrated. I mean, it's just a tough time for a lot of people out there, but that is the reason why the IRS has been delayed on giving people their EINs. And obviously we've seen it with all our clients and people unable to open up bank accounts, so on and so forth. But, again, I mean, that's just a pure issue with the IRS. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we've seen processing times of several months these last couple of months. But recently, we've seen somewhat quicker processing times from the IRS side. So, yeah, hopefully anybody who's waiting for their EIN, you're most likely going to receive it shortly. But yeah, these last couple of months have been tough for somebody trying to start a business, considering that opening up a bank account, you're going to need your EIN. A lot of times working with certain companies, they're going to request your EIN. So it is important to have one in order to start doing business, even though it's not required per se in order to start doing business. But yeah, it limits you in a lot of ways not having that EIN. So yeah, hopefully soon when the IRS is back at full force, there's going to be much shorter processing times. Generally, they say it takes 4 to 5 business days in terms of processing the EIN.
Yeah, exactly. So just going through some of these questions here. one is, um, this is from Ramapati. I love that name. I want to use my U.S. company to invest in the stock market. What would be my tax liabilities? Would I have to pay inheritance or capital gains tax? And again, if you are a non-U.S. person, you do not have to pay capital gains tax. You would have to pay dividend tax or interest tax. But one thing that's really important that a lot of people don't know about is that if you have over $60,000 invested in what's known as U.S. situs assets, such as real estate or such as stocks like Google and Apple. If that value is over $60,000, then technically you could be subject to U.S. inheritance tax. Now, there's a way to get out of that by actually having those U.S. assets owned by a foreign company or a foreign trust. And of course, we set that up for people. But you do want to be aware of that if you do have a lot of U.S. Like I said, U.S. investments. If you're investing in bonds, if you're investing in index funds or mutual funds, or just have the cash there, then that's not subject to inheritance tax. But if it's known as U.S. situs assets, it could be. Now, again, you could still keep the money in the States. You could keep it in the name of your company, your LLC. You could have it, distribute it into your personal name and keep that bank account in the States. That doesn't matter. And again, if you're not doing business in the States, then that's not effectively connected income, regardless. So it would not be subject to tax. One person asked if we help with I-10s, which we do, and an I-10 is an individual tax ID number. So just like an LLC or a company needs a company tax ID number, an EIN, and I-10 is for individuals. So people, that's not a requirement for filing. I mean, if you do end up filing a 1040-R, it is a requirement, but from the corporate side, it's not. And someone asked, Matteo, you're living in Europe, you own the LLC, you're selling online courses, etc. in Europe. Yeah, you don't have to do any sort of taxes, but you do need to do the tax form, right? You would have to do the 5472 form. Some other people were asking, do you have to file local taxes on this corporate income, right? And then if you're taking money out, and that's a big question. That obviously is something that you need to ask your local tax accountant, right? I mean, if you're, let's say, using an LLC to sell products online and they're being shipped from China to the rest of the world, you might have some local tax obligations. I mean, that obviously really just depends on what you're doing, so to speak, and where you're located. I mean, I know in Europe there's that. Yeah, I mean, you might have a presence or what's known as a nexus in some of these countries. So it is pretty important. Max asked about what taxes are required for a SaaS business if an LLC sells subscription cloud software is subject to sales tax. Victor, do you know a lot about sales tax for cloud software?
For cloud software, I would actually have to look into that more in detail. It's one of these things where generally sales tax is going to apply to specific to physical products. When there's digital services, it really depends. Some states do charge sales tax on that as well, but not all. So there's a few states that have started to charge sales tax on digital products as well. So it really depends, and it really depends on where you're offering your cloud services from. Are your services in the US or are they abroad? Where your client's located. So it really depends on on really where you sell and from where you sell.
Yeah. I mean, generally services aren't subject to sales tax, but if it is sort of a SaaS, like a software as a service, then uh, then it could be, right? Some other
Correct.
questions in the chat. Again, if you just have like a virtual address, virtual office, that doesn't constitute effectively connected income. I mean, just having
Yeah.
an address, right? Which of course you need one for the registered agent, and even if you have some sort of like Regis, what have you, that's not considered yeah,
And you can
effective.
think about it a little bit like this. It's a third party service that you pay for. It's not owned by the company per se. And the same goes a lot of times for using a third party service, whether it's for fulfillment of orders, or similar for e-commerce company. It's not necessarily part of your company. And again, if that company is not working almost exclusively for your company, then you might not necessarily be considered engaged in a US trade or business due to the fact that you have a virtual office or a fulfillment service in the US.
Yeah. Andrei Marinscu, I'm going to guess from Romania, is has a C corp, and is asking, well, if you have U.S. customers, are you subject to the 21% profit tax? And that's on global income. Anything that runs through that C corp is subject to 21%. So the sort of like effectively connected income argument is really only for LLCs. You're paying 21% regardless. Of course, you could deduct expenses. You could even take a direct salary for your services, and that would essentially, try to optimize, the quote unquote profit of your C corp, so that you could, not pay, not show a large profit to pay the 21%, but you would pay 21% on your worldwide income. Somebody else, Noah, mentioned that he was born in Atlanta, so he has both U.S. and Danish citizenship. So congratulations, Noah, because you're what's known as I would assume, an accidental American, or somebody who has U.S. citizenship, and you're subject to tax on worldwide income, which basically means that you should be filing a U.S. tax return. Sorry, I lost my screen.
Yeah. A lot of times we've seen also people in your situation, you might not even have a social security number yet. You might not even have a US passport yet. But technically, if you're a US citizen, you should be filing taxes on an annual basis, regardless of where you earn your income. A lot of times you would have to go to the embassy and apply for a social security number. And this is something that we can definitely help you with as well. This is something that we do on, I would say, a weekly basis at least. Maybe not accidental Americans, but people that have not been filing their US tax returns. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Just going through just so many good questions here. Rishabh, I am a foreign owner of a single LLC. Am I considered a U.S. tax person? I sell on Amazon, and they make me they're asking me to take a tax interview. I mean, listen, you're not a U.S. person if you're a foreign owner of an LLC. And this sort of comes to another question, which is, well, if I sell on Amazon, am I taxable in the United States? And that's also a situation that's really dependent on where your primary place of business is. Are you drop shipping from China or another country? Are you keeping a warehouse via Amazon FTA? And as we mentioned in the presentation, having these sort of permanent establishment rules, right? So if you're from a treaty country and everything's run out of that treaty country, then you do not have to pay tax in the United States because of the tax treaty country, and because your company has a permanent establishment in your home country, whether it's India or you somewhere in Europe or wherever, a country with a tax treaty um, in the United States, with the United States. Just an FYI, all the prices we gave for the bookkeeping are monthly, and then the tax return is annual. So just so people understand, because that was a question. And listen, if I'm going to try and go through some of the most relevant, questions right now, just for everyone to sort of get value out of it. But as I said, I mean, we're going to send out everything, after the webinar, and you know where to find us. I mean, onlinetaxman.com is the website. Feel free to reach out. But we have a wonderful team, and if you want to just reply to the email that you receive, with the link for the recording, or let's say you watch the recording, later with, your family and friends. Maybe you have like, Saturday night movie night and watch this recording again. You can, you could ask us as many questions as you like, over email, and especially because I'm just looking through it, and some of these questions are, just very specific, and I want to sort of keep it broad strokes for the group so everyone could get value. I have a USEIN for another business, but I'm opening one for an e-commerce. So can you use the same EIN? No, you want to use a different EIN. I mean, if you have two LLCs, they need two EINs essentially.
Yeah, so an EIN is going to be specific to a specific entity, so you can't really reuse one.
Yeah. Another question posed by Rajat was, listen, I have a Wyoming LLC, but I want my office in New York City due to some apparel buyers that he works with. You could set up your office in New York City. In fact, we have a great registered agent, or I should say mail service, in New York with a Fifth Avenue address. And so, Rajat, you reach out to us, and we're happy to refer you to that provider, because it actually is a good address, and it's very inexpensive, very, very affordable for having a New York City mailing address.
Yeah, and even though your mailing address can generally be in any other state that you would like to have your address in, whether it's for display purposes or for convenience, the reason why you have this registered agent is that so you have an address in the state of incorporation as well. So the registered agent is going to be your address in Wyoming, although your mailing address can be completely different.
Yeah, exactly. And so just for anyone who's also interested, I mean, we do help people open up bank accounts in the United States. We work with a virtual bank, so you don't have to travel. So again, if you have your EIN number, your incorporation documents, and an operating or shareholder agreement, which we could help you out with, we do offer that service of opening up a bank account, even if you've already had your company open. Same thing. I mean, there's PayPal and Stripe, so on and so forth. So we do help people with setting up these accounts. Okiki from Nigeria, can I get a sales tax for a virtual office? I mean, technically, it has nothing to do with the virtual office. It really has to do with where you're selling. And there's some very very famous case called the Wayfair case, which talks about sort of the applicability of potentially sales tax and state tax in each state that you're selling. Someone else asked, can you open up a bank account without an EIN? That is not possible.
Yeah, generally, in order to open a bank account, the bank is gonna require that you have your articles of information. You're gonna need your EIN, and they're also gonna require that you have a operating agreement or a shareholders agreement, basically an agreement outlining the ownership of the company, the rules of the company, the responsibilities of the company. So that's something that you would need to provide to the bank in order to open up a bank account.
Yeah. I mean, just someone asked again about the 5472. If you're a single owner LLC, I mean, it is compulsory. I mean, these forms are forms that need to be filed with the IRS. So again, if you're a foreign owner, a single owner of an LLC, you're having transactions, et cetera, with that LLC, then you do have to file the 5472 tax return. If it's a partnership, it's a 1065. If it's a C corp, it's an 1120. So, I mean, these
It's
are
worth
compulsory
mentioning
forms.
as well that foreign owners of a U.S. C corporation might also have to file the Form 5472. LLC
Yeah.
partnerships don't.
Keshav asked, do we need I tend to file taxes as a single member LLC. You do not if you're going to do the 5472. However, if you do have effectively connected income in the United States, so essentially if you're going to file the 1040NR, then you would have to file or you'd need an ITIN to file that tax return. So
Yeah.
I think we're gonna wrap it up for today. Just I appreciate everyone's questions. I appreciate everyone listening. And you know, like I said, I mean, we're here to be a resource for everybody. You know, obviously, you know, if people need bookkeeping services, need you know, tax preparation services, you know, feel free to sign up with us. I mean, obviously, like I said, by July 31st, we are offering these highly discounted rates. And so feel free to reply to the email that you receive with the webinar recording. We'd be happy to help sign up for that process and just any other questions that I wasn't able to get to. So thank you very much, everybody. It's been a real pleasure, and have a wonderful day.